Hi, Mala. Can you unmute yourself? Okay, great. All right.
Is that Thara?
Yes,
Okay.
I will start the video, but I do not look particularly pleasant today.
Of course you do. You just don't have your super flax behind you. Oh, you just zoomed out.
Yeah, I'm actually in South Carolina, so
Oh,
I working from my in-laws. So let me do Ganesha in the background today.
it's zoomed out. I just emailed you. I don't know if it's too late. Some
No,
polls.
I can set it up while we're talking.
I also didn't ask Hamal and Ravi, so they also
Whatever.
have to say it's okay.
Yeah, maybe we can just touch base with them when we're on this call, but I'll try and set this up as I go, because
Okay. I don't know how to do a poll, so thank God you do.
yeah, I just learned how to do it. So the first kind of, so the first question you wanted, let me just look at this.
Kind of like, are we talking to more immigration lawyers or are we talking to just regular lawyers? Just kind of feel it out.
Immigration attorney.
Feel free to make any edits.
I'm just gonna okay. So let's learn about the participant.
I guess the question can be, I am a.
Yeah. Choice 1, immigration attorney. I am okay. Choice 2, not attorney, no immigration experience, right? And then attorney with immigration experience
or exposure, like sometimes
exposure. Yeah, all right.
big law firms do like a little bit of pro bono and they get a little taste of it.
Yeah. Maybe we should do with exposure first.
Okay. And I should put my phone on do not disturb.
Yeah, I know I got to do the same. Immigration exposure and not an attorney.
I'll be right back in like 2 minutes. I'm just going to leave it on. Okay.
So which country has 2/3 family-based and 1/3 employment-based immigration?
The United States is 2/3 family and 1/3 employment. You can word that better, maybe, but it was just a fun fact.
Yeah, so which country has it? We're asking the question, right? So I'll put Canada first. So US, and you can answer the question, right?
Yeah, so like I thought you could But the first country, which country is 2/3 family and 1/3 employment? And the other one is the opposite. And so that's why the first answer is
Yeah.
Canada, then US. I don't know if that's too convoluted.
I think what I'm gonna do is just do which country has it, and then we can move on from there, because then you can answer the question. I just did 2/3, 1/3, and then you guys can answer as you go.
Okay,
All right,
a little less fun, but okay. Just kidding.
sorry.
No, I'm
Sorry.
kidding. I just wanted to mix it up a little bit than just us talking.
Yeah, it'll be fun too. Okay, so
Now I get to see if you laugh at the next question.
oh, Dalir Mehndi. Okay, let's find out. Why has Dalir Mehndi? Okay, I like this. Let me create that. The thing is you have to create these in the, it's weird, like the way Zoom does this is kind of odd. You create it in the Zoom thing. All right. Okay, now I need the answers. Let's see.
It's just C. Oh,
Oh no, not, you're gonna,
we'll say the answer.
yeah, you have to state, it's more fun if you say it, but let's find out what people think.
Yeah. You'll be like Vanna White.
Sort of, yeah. Was it
Dara, bring in the next question, please.
Sort of, yeah. I don't know how many we'll get through, but there's 30 people registered, which is good.
Oh, that's good.
So we'll see. So the thing with Zoom is it's complicated. Sometimes we'll get all of them, and then sometimes we won't. But
Yeah, I mean, I definitely register for a lot of webinars that I don't attend in the high
okay,
hopes that I'm
Hummel,
free.
I'm gonna admit Hummel.
Oh, good.
There's another visitor that's gonna start, but
Hi, Hummel.
Hi,
Hummel, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
All right, we've got this going. I'm like filling in the questions here that we've got.
Okay, cool.
I didn't discuss it. I didn't ask you, Hummel. Is that okay? I just put
Oh.
together.
Knock yourself out.
Okay.
I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah.
I got you.
Dartha rubbed it. Rubbed him the wrong way. That's hilarious. I love that.
Hummel, did you get your mug? Remember?
Oh, I don't have my sassy mug.
Any mug will do. It's a chai chat. We don't
I'm
have
gonna
to be
go.
fancy.
I'm gonna go get it. Please hold.
Okay. Dara, do you have a mug?
No, I wish I did. I'm sorry. I just am like, first of all, just learn to poll. So
I'm
give me a
so
little
sorry.
bit.
You totally don't even have to do it. We can just even do it orally if it's complicated.
No. Like, okay, so do you want to do the one, how many people of the world have been forced to flee? Do you want to do that one? Or should we go into citizenship? Is it easier to gain citizenship in Canada or the US?
Yeah, we can just do citizenship.
Just so we have 4, I think 4 is good.
Yeah,
That's
that's fine.
Because it's only a 1-hour program. So we don't want it like overloaded with questions, I guess.
Totally. Yeah. Plus, it's kind of a vague stat. I was just quickly Googling it.
How's this?
Ooh, I love it. How do you get your, like when I put my cup up, it still does it. Okay. Sometimes it zooms out. I guess.
Oh, you have to do it right in front of you or else it'll be like weird.
So we're gonna be like, welcome to the chai chat.
That's cute. All right, let's see. There is someone waiting in the wings. Let's see.
Is that Ravi, maybe?
It's probably Ravi.
It's Saidi Mirza.
That's not Ravi.
That's what I said.
They can wait 4 more minutes.
Yeah.
Hopefully Robbie joins because this is awkward. The good news is that I think Hummel can also do some Canadian stuff,
But
so
just because I'm, Canadian, I can make stuff up.
yeah, it's fine.
Homo, can you get higher in your camera view? I feel like you're a little lower.
You know
Or
what's
maybe I'm
happening?
too
This is so strange. My chair is all today has decided to
Oh.
just keep doing this.
high. That's much better. That's really good.
Ladies, this thing is recording right now, just FYI, but we'll cut out this first part. Our
Okay.
goal is to have all of our programs recorded, so, try not to say any swear words, I'm
Thanks
not,
for the
I'm
tip.
not sure it'll come up in immigration talk, but
Well, there is a lot, but it's a part of the self-care.
Yeah. are you still in Canada?
No, I drove back last night. Yeah.
All right, good. I mean, not that you shouldn't be in Canada. It's
No,
lovely.
no. No, if I was, I'm sure my 11-month-old nephew would be more than
Oh.
happy to have jumped in and say a few words.
He was rather speedy, and the Facebook post.
Oh yeah. He is 0 to 60 nonstop. He's very entertaining, needless to say, to
Cute,
everybody.
very cute, but also speedy. I was just like, gets
You
fast.
can't put him. I think I must have lost 2 pounds just chasing him around the house. Just.
I need to visit your nephew.
Oh
Yeah,
my
'cause
God. I tell my brother and sister-in-law, I'm like, this could be a great weight loss program. Just get a bunch of babies that are fast and have people chase them around, a track.
Yeah, great.
So,
All right. We are starting to get some guests.
yeah, I don't know where Ruffy is.
Do we want to ping him?
Yeah, so I'm gonna do.
I was gonna wait until 2 o'clock Eastern exactly to let the guests in,
Yeah,
but usually they'll pop in, like they kind of roll in. So
yeah. Ooh.
Mona, is that you?
Hey guys,
Hi.
how are you guys?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you guys.
All right, we're gonna admit people in, but we don't have Ravi yet. So
Yeah, I
I
guess
just
not.
texted him. I'm gonna go mute and also call him. I'm gonna turn my video off for a moment.
okay,
Hey Mala, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
Good. I'm sorry I'm not gonna be able to stay on the whole time, but I wanted to come on and see what I could do to help. This is recording. I just checked our Zoom and it's recording, so that's good.
yeah, and then we'll have to splice this one again, Mona. You're gonna get real
Yeah.
good at splicing.
I'm working on it. I'm trying to learn like how to do it, but we're getting there,
Where are you located, Mona?
LA. I'm in
Oh,
LA.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, where are you?
I'm in Arizona, but I moved from LA in 2018. So I was
Oh,
a
you
part
did?
of
Okay.
Saba, SoCal before.
What
Hey,
part of
Mo-
LA?
Mona, is there any chance that you can log in outside of the Saba Zoom? Because I can't do the Saba thing. Like I can't activate the polls because you're in it.
Good time.
Yeah, let me log out and
Okay,
I'll log
hey,
in through my
Ravi's in the waiting room if you want to
Yep.
let him in.
I'm
yeah,
just
okay.
letting,
I'm
Okay.
gonna log out. I'm
Bye.
gonna leave. Bye.
All right. Thanks, Mona.
Mhm.
Okay.
And Hummel, I'll monitor the chat for questions. And I know we have a very casual group, talking group.
All right,
Hello.
Ravi,
Hi
ready to
guys.
go?
Hello. I'm so sorry about that.
No problem. I'm going to admit some people. There's 4 that are waiting, so let's admit them.
Okay.
And then as people come, I'll let them in. All right.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I wasn't sure if you guys were able to.
Hi, all. We'll be starting in about a minute or 2. In the meantime, I'm going to put, this is,
Shoot, you're kind of jumbling. Let's see if I can, is there an audio option I can have too? Maybe I do it to my phone, thanks.
Yeah, I think there is one that comes up with the registration. It should be there.
Okay, let's see. Maybe if I can call in, then I can put this on mute,
Mute.
and then it'll be better.
I don't know what's going on. This poor gentleman can't get in.
Yeah, maybe that.
Hey, there may be an issue with the polling because Moda logged on, for some reason it won't let me do it, but let me do this. I'm gonna just see if I can do it a different way.
Okay.
I'm gonna
Ravi,
make
is that okay with you? The few questions I had as a poll, I just sent it.
I'm just dialing in now.
Uh,
'Cause I can't hear you guys.
Okay,
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Mala, do me a favor and give me back host duties now. If you go to the side of your thing, it should be able to return the host duties back to me.
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press pound.
Where do I click to turn you back to the host?
If you go to participants and then on the
Oh, I think I
participants,
did it.
there you go.
Okay.
Because I gotta let people in and unfortunately it won't do that.
You have been added to the waiting list. You cannot talk or listen until the host admits you to the meeting. You are muted. You can mute or unmute yourself by pressing *6.
Okay, Ravi, now you gotta put that on mute. Now we should be good. You're on mute. Okay, you gotta unmute your phone.
Okay, okay.
Now you're set.
But am I echoey though? Because it's also going through there?
Yeah, I think you have to mute yourself on video and then unmute yourself on your phone.
Do you know what I pressed to unmute myself on my phone? Is it star or something, star 6?
Let's see. I don't know because. Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely. All right.
All right.
I still get an echo.
He's got to turn off the sound on his phone, on the computer.
Is that better?
Yeah. Okay, so we may have to ask this because it's a fairly casual conversation. Mala, you could just ask the questions generally and people can put their hand up on the thing because for some reason the poll is no longer working. Sorry.
Sure.
Okay. I think we can get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Immigration Law Section's Chai Chat. We're going to put everyone on mute with the exception of our 3 panelists for the moment. And then if there's time at the end, we'll ask people to unmute. You can always ask questions during the panel in the chat function. And we look forward for everyone to have a good time. All right.
Well, welcome everybody. My name is Hemal Vyas. I'm one of the immigration co-chairs, and today I'm looking forward to today's panel discussion comparing US and Canadian immigration law. I'll let my other co-panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, Mala.
Go ahead, Ravi.
Okay, so you guys can hear me okay?
All right, tricky because I'm technically muted on video, but I'm actually able to speak to my phone because I'm just having sound issues. Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm an immigration co-chair new this year, so happy to be under Hemel's wing here. And you know, I specialize in Canadian immigration, and it's been fascinating to sort of observe the differences over the years. And so I have a lot of questions that I'm excited to have the answers to. So we're looking forward to this.
Awesome. And I'm Mala Bajpai. I'm the other under Hummel's other wing as a co-chair in the immigration section at SABA, and I practice immigration law in Arizona and California. And we're just really excited to start off the SABA year with a new event. Thanks for joining us today.
Great. So, you know, we've done a lot of back and forth discussion, and we're very excited about this particular topic. If we're going to get started, we're going to start talking about family immigration and the different nuances between US and Canada. For, you know, there are some subtle nuances, and I've learned a lot from speaking with Ravi. For example, in the United States, you have options of filing if you're a citizen, and you have options for filing if you're a green card holder. The citizens can file for their immediate relatives, their siblings, and spouses. And for green card holders, there's limitations on who you can file for. Mala, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think actually we also wanted to do a little poll and see who is in our chat room with us today. I know we couldn't get the poll to work, but if you can use the raise hand button and let us know if you're an immigration lawyer. Any immigration lawyers here today?
Wow.
None. Okay, good.
Fun.
Just kidding.
No, we got one. We have Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Oh, and Tamara.
And then the second one is if you are a lawyer with some immigration experience, perhaps doing pro bono or working at a clinic, kind of assisting in some immigration matters, but that's not your main area of practice. And then if you're just a lawyer who has no exposure to immigration. And then, oh, hi, Devin. And then the last one is if you're not a lawyer. All right, well, thanks for joining us today. And the other question we wanted to ask you guys, so there's one country that is 2/3 family-based immigration and 1/3 employment-based immigration, US or Canada. And then the other one is 1/3 family-based and 2/3 employment-based. So if you think that, I guess you could type it in the chat. Which country is 2/3 family-based and 1/3 employment-based? We have one answer. Anyone else want to guess? It's the same answer. It's the United States, and it's the correct answer. The US is definitely focused on family reconciliation. So that's definitely emphasis. And in terms of the family-based different, I mean, Hummel was right in terms of like the different priorities if you're a US citizen versus a green card holder. And then it's under different categories if you're a spouse, if you're an unmarried child under 21, if you're married, and it just goes down the preference categories. And then we can see the backlog on that and the visa bulletin, which comes out every month. So that kind of tells us where we are. Most countries are current, but definitely there's a delay for China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines. Do you want to talk about a little bit about family-based, Ravi, in Canada?
Yeah, so it's very different. You are considered a dependent if you're under 22 years old. But regardless if you're married, you're not anymore. So we did have it such that if you were under 19, so we moved to under 19 because the thinking was, you know, most people, they go to university or whatever, they're kind of out of the nuclear family, they're on their way. But then we switched it back to under 22 when there was a bit of a kind of a outcry, basically saying, look, a lot of immigrant families come in and they certainly don't feel independent at under 22, and you know, there's joint family systems, et cetera. But I do get a lot of questions around, you know, I want to immigrate with my mom and my dad, and I've got a wife, and I've got a husband or something, I've got kids, and can I do it? And you know, it's really just the nuclear family. And then once they come over, they can then potentially sponsor their parents. But we have a big distinction between inland and outland. So outland is where you file, you know, at a visa office abroad, and inland is when you're physically in Canada with your partner and you sponsor the person there. And the difference relates to, number one, appeal rights. So you don't have a right of appeal if you're filing from within the country, but you do if you're filing from outside of the country. Also, you know, the categories are such that, you know, you can sponsor your spouse, you can sponsor a common law partner, and that means someone you live together in a marriage-like relationship for over a year. And you can sponsor a conjugal partner. A conjugal means maybe you're same sex, maybe, you know, you can't get to each other's countries, but you're in a relationship because of visa restrictions and homophobia or whatever. You can sponsor that person that way. So, but the big difference is, I think, that unlike the United States, United Kingdom, when you become a permanent resident, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the United States, you check on the person, right? So in other words, you can just have a marriage certificate and, you know, not too much else, and then get in, is my understanding. Whereas in Canada, we're very worried about that, because once we make you a permanent resident of Canada, we don't check on you anymore. Okay, that's it, full stop. So because of that, if we just let everybody in with just a marriage certificate, for instance, for the spouse category, then there would potentially be a lot of fraud, right? So it's kind of awkward, but I mean, you know, this is the South Asian Bar Association. So imagine, you know, that there's so many cases I've had over the years where people say, Ravi, you know, we're going to get married, but I really want to bring my spouse as soon as the marriage happens, because, you know, traditionally you're leaving your family of origin, you're joining the other family, and they want to bring their spouse over then. So they say, I've got an idea. Why don't we just do the engagement ceremony and pretend it's the marriage ceremony, or we'll do a registered marriage and then get the paperwork in, and then we'll do the real ceremony when the visa is about to be issued. And that has occurred to almost like 100% of people who, you know, are in the South Asian community who are trying to immigrate. And I have to tell them, sorry, you have to do the real wedding, and then you got to wait up to a year until the visa is finalized. And maybe traditionally the female may join the male's family even and start living with the male's parents, and then they wait for a year for them to come. So that's sort of broad brushstrokes. You know, how about, but notice you can't sponsor siblings in Canada. That's a no-no. You could sponsor orphan nieces and nephews, but you can't sponsor siblings. Do you guys have anything where if you're, we have something where if you're alone in Canada and you have no spouses or kids or relatives really, and then you have someone else outside, say back in India, and they also have no spouse or kids, we called it a lonely Canadian. Do you have it? Like, what would you do in that situation? Is there any way to bring someone like that in? I guess you could as a sibling, right? If they're siblings.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept. We don't have anything. There are no lonely Americans, Ravi. No, but that's a very interesting concept. We don't have that. And that's a really, you know, in terms of unification and from a wellness standpoint, that I think that's really phenomenal. Another difference that, you know, that Canada recognizes that we don't here in the United States is the common law. So you have to be married. You know, you can't, they don't accept that. You can't have a common law arrangement and then petition for them. You need to be legally married. And they also do accept if you get a court marriage, a court registered marriage, and then you can petition for them, and then the religious ceremony can happen at some other point in time. It's okay. They recognize that, which I think is different from what you described about the Canadian requirements. And it sounds also, for example, if you file a petition as a U.S. citizen for your spouse who's overseas, and you have been married for less than 2 years, you'll get a conditional green card. And then after 2 years pass, you have to show that you continue to be married and that you indeed married in good faith, and that it wasn't just to get that green card to come to the United States. So there's that checks and balance, if you will. So I think those are differences.
That makes sense. That makes more sense. Yeah, because if you've been together 2 years, then they're not as concerned about you. And if it's less, and you also have the fiancé visa, which we don't have.
Right. And that's given the processing times, people opt to go directly to it. Just you end up waiting the same amount of time to be able to come over. So for merit for
and you also have entry fraud issues, right? I mean, when it comes to that, I mean, if someone comes in and they marry and it's quicker,
right, and yes, right. So if you say, for example, you enter the United States on a visitor visa, and then you get married, you come in October 15th and October 16th, you get married, you certainly will be immediately considered to have committed fraud, because the intent of your visit was not just to visit, it was actually to get married, and you had immigrant intent. They have a 30, 60, 90-day rule. So if you come here October 15th and then, 90 days after you get married, they don't consider, they don't question that in terms of, is there immigrant intent or is there fraud that took place? So there's that type of a wait period, if you will. And then you fast forward to green card interview, right? And then all those things are discussed there.
There's another quirk I think I've noticed over the years, only because one of my great friends, he married someone from the UK, lives in New York, and he was sponsoring her, and she was in the United States, in New York, and she had to go back home for some reason. And they got caught because they didn't get this thing called advance parole, right? Which is advance permission from the government of the United States to leave. Now, what's interesting is we don't have that in Canada. There's generally a requirement if you're doing the inland process that you have to live with your sponsor, but it's sort of an unwritten rule that it's okay to go to the Caribbean for vacation, or if there's a family emergency and then you come back. I mean, it's you're not a prisoner, is what I like to describe it. If you go for 3 or 4 months, that's a different story. You're not allowed to do that. But if you're just going for a week here and there, especially with your spouse, we're not going to have a problem with you in Canada. But you will have a problem in the United States if you don't get that special permission, right?
Right, that's right. When you file the green card, and this is inland, so you're already here in the United States, so you're going to file. It's called adjusting your status, and if you're doing it overseas, it's called consular processing. So if you filed your adjustment petition, along with it, you get work and travel permission. So, if you leave without that advance parole, you will have considered to have abandoned your pending green card application. So yeah, you have to. You're kind of landlocked until you get that document.
I think this
want to
affects the
talk about.
South Asian community significantly, because we have a lot of software or tech industry people from India who have a really long wait line, and they've got their adjustment petition pending, and they can't travel without the advance parole, which is also not a cheap thing to accomplish.
So actually, though, if it's an employment-based petition and they have a pending green card application, their underlying non-immigrant visa would allow them to travel while that green card's pending, as long as they have that visa stamp in their passport to facilitate their re-entry to the United States. And Mala, to your point, it can create a delay because there are delays in visa issuance. So if you're going to go to India or I'm using India as an example. If you're going to go there and you don't have a valid visa in your passport to re-enter, it's like the key to the club, right? If you don't have that, you're going to have to wait. You have to get a visa appointment. Right now with the pandemic, and some consulates are showing 999 days to process the visa, which basically means that they're closed for business and they're only granting emergency visa appointments. So you certainly can run into a return delay overseas.
And is there a difference? Because, excuse me, in Canada, only Canadian citizens who are living abroad can sponsor their spouse. Okay, while living abroad. So if I'm Canadian and I just go to New York, or I go to England, or I go to India, as a Canadian citizen, I have a special right. I can live with my spouse, and I can start the process and do the processing while I'm living with that spouse outside of Canada. But if I'm only a permanent resident, I'm not allowed to do that. I have to be here, she's there, and we're separated, and it sucks, but that's just the law. So in the United States, if you're a U.S. citizen versus a green card, is there a difference? Can you live outside the United States while sponsoring a spouse?
It depends where. So if you have to have U.S. presence ultimately, but if you are in the process of transitioning to moving the family, if you will, to the United States, you can file, but you have to. It's a very gray area of time. Mm-hmm. So by the time you get, the first part would be to file an I-130 immigrant visa petition for your spouse. And at that point, they're going to ask, where are you? So you do need to have a U.S. presence to be here. So you'd be petitioning with a U.S. address. You can't be living overseas for an extended period of time. It's a bit different than what Canada allows.
Also, our permanent residents can be out for more than 6 months.
Right.
Okay, right. Well, that's interesting. And I think, just so people know, we have a very strange system for sponsoring parents. So unlike for spouses where, you file it and there's no caps or anything, there's no priority date, you just get it in about a year. For parental sponsorships, there's no right of appeal for parents and grandparents. There's a cap. So it was 10,000 last year and it's 30,000 this year. It's a bit complicated because we had a sort of a lottery system. Then it was, first it was like, okay, if you get your, courier into this one city in Mississauga, Ontario, and there's a long line. If you were in the first batch, you were accepted. Then they said, no, it's not fair. Let's do a lottery. Then they did a system where you had to be at your computer, and within a few minutes, all the spots were gone. So if you had better internet connection or weren't disabled or didn't have multiple parents, you had an advantage. So they got rid of that. Now you just, at your leisure, over a few weeks, you can fill out what's called an expression of interest. And then from that pool, the government took 10,000 last year. And then what they did this year is they just kept the same pool from last year and said, okay, if you're in that pool from 2020, we're going to take 30,000 of you. And we don't know what it's going to be for next year. But I've sort of proposed, that they do a weighted lottery so that if you try year after year after year, and it's been like your 5th, 6th year trying, that you have maybe a little bit better chance. Otherwise, you're just subject to them, selecting you fairly randomly. And the other thing about Canada is that there is an income requirement. I think there is I'll ask you about that, but we don't have an income requirement for spouses or common law partners or conjugal partners. But the applicant themselves has to provide evidence, or the officer has to be satisfied that they're not going to, go on welfare or anything, right? But in terms of the sponsor, the petitioner, I guess, that Canadian or permanent resident sponsoring doesn't have to have an income, but for parents you do. And they look at the last 3 years, and they just there's a chart, and just to make sure they have the income. So why? For us, we just consider a spouse or common law partner to be such an important relationship that we don't care if you're rich or poor. But why would, I guess in the United States, even if you're an American citizen, we think of it as like a benefit to being Canadian, right? Like we're thinking of the Canadian in that scenario. So, but if you're an American and you fall in love with someone and you just don't have a lot of money, you can't sponsor them, or can you?
You can. You have to show an affidavit of support, and if you don't have, so here they have, it's called, I wish they changed the name, but it's called the poverty guidelines. So depending on the number of people in your family, you have to meet a certain minimum wage requirement. So let's say if you're going to be petitioning for someone overseas, you have to show you can support a family of 2. If you're not hitting
Mhm.
that number, you can actually have co-sponsors that can also submit an affidavit of support in support of your application, so that you'd be able to file for them. I did want to go back. You said something interesting, and I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You can actually file for your grandparents as well, or is it just your
Yeah.
parents?
Parents and grandparents, yeah.
Wow, we can't do that here.
And your affidavit of support, my understanding is that it does, like for us, a co-sponsor, like if I'm sponsoring a grandparent or a parent, I can have my spouse as a co-sponsor, but nobody else. But for you guys, when you're sponsoring your spouse, and let's say you don't have the money, can it be anyone that can be a co-sponsor?
Yes.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
And they're on the hook.
I think my dad sponsored about 40 different families just to help them with their paperwork.
And keep in mind, whoever the co-sponsor is obligated the same way as the principal to ensure that the people being sponsored, the beneficiaries, are not going to become wards of the state. So if let's say the marriage doesn't work out for whatever reason, and you were the co-sponsor on that petition for the marriage, the beneficiary and the government can enforce your affidavit of support, saying, hey, despite the marriage falling apart, you're obligated to support this person for the period of time that you said you would until they get back on their feet. So it kind of ensures that people don't, fall by the wayside and it's to protect the beneficiary when they arrive to the United States, so that they do have a support system in place.
That's interesting because we look at it a little differently. So I get the concept, right? And that's why Mala's dad was able to do this for a number of people. But our concept is a little different. For sure, if you default, they're going to go after the person who is the sponsor and co-sponsor. But our co-sponsors only really exist when you're sponsoring parents or grandparents, number one. Number two, let's say I sponsor my mom and dad and my wife's a co-sponsor, right? Then down the road, my wife says, hey, I want to bring my parents down. Well, now the family size that we look at has to account for the fact that I sponsored my parents. So in other words, I'm like Mala's dad, like you can't just sort of, there's a limit, right? Because, unless you're a billionaire, you can't just keep, you can't keep adding, otherwise you'll hit that income.
Well, I'm sure Mala's dad didn't do 40 at one time.
No.
It's over a period of time.
Oh, regardless,
So
even if it's not the same time, like I said, it could be.
Right, but you have the affidavit of support, the responsibility of a sponsor, like you have built-in time periods. I think I want to say it's like 40 quarters or something like that. So if you do someone for 40 quarters and then that kind of ends, then you can do another group. So they actually ask you when you're filling out, have you submitted for anybody else? So you put that up front, so you can't just do it for a cumulative number of people for ongoing. So it's kind of along the same spirit of what you just described.
Now, we could talk about this forever, but I guess we should move on. That was probably, we knew we were going to talk about that one a long time, but why don't we whip through employment-based immigration?
Well, do we
Wanna
have
go
any
first?
questions from anybody about
Oh,
family-based
yeah.
before we move on to employment? Do you want to put it in the chat or do you want to unmute?
No, there is a question. We said, wait, there's no 90-day fiance visa in Canada? No, there is not. We're missing out on some great fiance programming. Okay, fine.
You're missing out on a
Well,
great TV
tell-
show.
Yes, exactly. Well,
Well,
I
I have a question for our participants as we segue into the employment law. Why has Dallaire Mandy stopped touring in North America? Is it A, he permanently damaged his vocal cords? Is it B, he converted to a religion that did not allow dancing? C, he was charged with immigration trafficking? Or D, the US just Dardi rubbed him the wrong way. So you can put your answer in the chat. Mona's our first answer. That's correct, immigration trafficking. So he would bring over troops as part of his tour and they would abscond. And then the next year he would bring over another troop and they would also abscond. And so he was eventually charged with immigration trafficking. Which brings us to employment-based sponsored visas.
Nice segue. I think since we're talking about Canada and America, I think it'd be a good place to start off is that with the US, Mexico, Canada agreement, formerly known as NAFTA, the Free Trade Act, Legacy Free Trade Act. So you guys may have sensed I have an accent, so I'm Canadian and American. So I kind of straddle both sides of the border. And because of that, the TN classification, Trade NAFTA, is one of my favorites. And there's 63 categories that you can choose from, and they have varying degrees of educational requirements. And it's fairly easy to get. You basically, and Ravi, I don't know what the reverse is, but if you're going to be filing for a TN, you basically can prepare a package, provide copy of their degree, proof of educational experience, any licensure requirements. You can actually email or fax the supporting documentation to the applicant. They show up at the airport or the border, and it's adjudicated, within half hour, whatever, and then 3 years you can live and work freely in the United States. Is that pretty much the same procedure? And that's for Canadians. For Mexicans, there's an additional step where you have to go to the border and apply at the consulate and apply for a visa to come in. But is that the same step for Canadians?
It was for many, many years. And then they brought in this thing called the employer portal. And that has been something that has been driving immigration lawyers in Canada nuts for the past several months, particularly this last week, because it's crashing. They've invested through the budget, tens of millions of dollars to fix our aging electronic platform. Anyway, so that's a separate issue. They'll eventually fix that. But no, it used to be that simple. But now the employer has to do an extra step and has to enter some information. And it got a little tricky for scenarios where there really wasn't, like maybe the person was had a US-based employer, and then they had a tenuous relationship. The person was going to work on at a Canadian site, but the Canadian, site really was not the employer. And unfortunately, it was required that you do the employer portal and that there be some entity in Canada that was filling that out. So we would just be upfront about it and say, look, this is not the employer. We put it in bold. They are just receiving the person, providing management consultant services or whatever. So there were some glitches there, but as long as you're honest, as with everything immigration, there was sort of workarounds. But otherwise, it's fairly simple. I mean, the one thing we were talking about before and preparing for this was just how interesting it is that as you move west, it gets the adjudication of work permits gets a little tougher. And in fact, so tough that there are some ports that an experienced immigration lawyer would simply not send you to because they're just either negligent or they just enjoy refusing people, everyone who comes in their offices. I don't know. But that's something that I sort of noticed over the years. And it is interesting. I don't really know what it is about that. Maybe in the eastern and central parts of Canada, the United States, along the border, there's more immigration. People are more used to immigrants. I don't know. But there seems to be a different feeling there. Do you agree?
There's definitely a hard to get TNs and TN renewals at the southern southwest borders. There's a huge variance in training with Border Patrol. The issue that they're kind of harping on is non-immigrant intent. Well, they'll see like it's supposed to be a temporary visa. So they'll see families, on TN visas for 5-10 years. And all of a sudden, some officer having a bad day will say, well, I think you've been here long enough. I don't think you have non-immigrant intent.
And that's it's the spirit of the act is lost on those types of officers, right? And it's to allow that free trade, if you will. You certainly have officers out west that also, like you said, Mala, are having a bad day, and they'll say, "Oh, you don't need a lawyer for this," or they'll they'll do the scrutiny where they will look at the person's transcripts or ask for the person's transcripts and say, I don't see enough coursework to justify you coming in as a geneticist or something, something really off the wall. And there have been moments where, well, in the past, they used to actually have a dedicated free trade officer at each port of entry. That if there was an issue, the free trade officer would actually speak with the attorney and say, if you give me this, we can have a discussion about it. And then when they created DHS, they did away with Legacy INS, the free trade officers were also taken away from all the ports. So that resulted in a bunch of adjudicators that weren't trained. You have like 4 or 5 hours at Glencoe down south, and then they would come and they think they knew how to apply the act. So you certainly lost a lot of history and training in that. So.
And I don't know, in Canada, do they do this where, like in Mexico, we'll have an approved TN for 3 years, but the consulate will only issue a 1-year visa? Keep renewing.
Typically, no. I mean, on renewal, they're pretty good with that in terms of. But oftentimes you get people traveling, and I'll just send them back to the border to get another one. There are, interestingly enough, I mean, we talked about this too. There's not just a TN, obviously. The TN is just for people who don't know, it's a list of occupations, and that list didn't change. We thought it might with Donald Trump being in power. We were worried that because he was so anti, the free movement of people, and we were concerned that the list would be seriously curtailed. I didn't mind the idea of modernizing it, but we have the same generic list that we've had for decades now of certain occupations like lawyers, management consultants, computer systems analysts, not programmers. Like there's all these weird sort of distinctions. That's the TN, or what we call NAFTA, or what we used to call NAFTA. Now we call it the CUSMA, Canada, U.S., Mexico agreement, which is also really petty, which reflects the people in power, I guess, at the time. But because the name of the thing differs depending on if you're Mexican, American, or Canadian. So you may call it the USCMA, we call it the CUSMA. Anyway, so the former NAFTA, that instrument had the group of occupations I talked about and what we've been talking about. There's also intercompany transferees. So if you work for a company for a year, you can work for the company, in the other country. There's the E2, which is interesting because the E2 is when you're an investor. So say you are American and you want to buy a business in Canada. It could be a very large business, like a clothing manufacturer. It could be, it could be a motel. It could be a gas station, whatever. Those types of things. The way we do it is we send it to the consulate, and then they issue the visa. But the way it's done for Canadian citizens going to the United States is different, right? I mean, you go to the Department of State, which is the U.S. consulate in Toronto, and other consulates across Canada also assist, traditionally have assisted. And then what happens is you get a visa. So it's one of the only times a Canadian citizen gets a visa, and that's just because these cases are voluminous and they're hard to, it takes a while for an officer to sift through all the information. So they just felt it was better if the Department of State officials dealt with it, put the visa in the passport. Then when you go to the border, U.S. Customs and Border Protection guys can just say, okay, I see this has been done. Come on in. Is that your sense too, Alma?
Yeah, it's that, and I find that the amount invested, the 100,000 that you have to show an investment. I'm surprised there aren't many more people doing that. Is there in Canada, is there the same amount, or is there a different amount, or does that even exist?
Well, I always thought there wasn't sort of a bright line test, because it sort of depends on, like, obviously manufacturing is going to have a lot more of a capital contribution, requirement than some kind of a consultant, right? Where it's just an office and a computer. So, but my informal kind of rule of thumb is that I like people buying businesses rather than creating businesses, because I like to be able to show that here are the 4 Americans and here's their tax returns, and they're going to keep employing them. I like that. I think if it's just about the guy or a woman coming over with their family, obviously it's considered marginal, so they don't really want to prove those. So it's sort of similar in Canada. I would say that, there isn't the same concentrated expertise as there is with an E2 officer at the consulate, where it's and then sometimes the adjudication changes depending on who that person is, but it's still, the person still has expertise. Whereas in Canada, it's not a common application. And, as long, it's just about making your case, and then I think they usually work out. But but that's, okay, so those are work permits, and that's the treaty. But in terms of employment immigration, we have a lot of different programs. We have, interestingly enough, you can't count self-employed experience, but if you come as an international student, then you got an open work permit. We call them open work permits because you can work openly for anyone. And if you start your own business, we almost penalize you because you're not allowed to count self-employed work experience. But there are programs where, if you've worked for an employer for a year, we have something called Express Entry, which we borrowed from Australia and New Zealand. And that's a program that was supposed to get you immigration within 6 months, typically more like a year. But with the pandemic and the desperation that Canada has had to reach a target of 401,000 immigrants, we've seen some pretty quick processing. But that's the Canada Experience class, where you've worked for an employer for a year, and then you have to meet a certain number of points, which dropped, by the way, down from what was in the mid 400s to 75 at one point, because they were so interested in converting people who are here into immigrants. Because of the border and COVID and everything else, we just simply weren't using the other program, which is called the Federal Skilled Worker Program, which is about people who are abroad based on their education and work experience in that point system. So we weren't bringing anyone in like that. But a lot of immigration consultants and agents who are not lawyers have been dumping people into the pool of applicants for that program. And so I think that, whereas the 2 programs led to Express Entry, that, either Canadian work experience or points system from those abroad led to Express Entry, which is in the mid 400s, they've decoupled it now. And then the points dropped for those who are here under, and had a year of Canadian work experience. But for those who are abroad, people kept putting them into the pool. And so I think by the time they open it, it's going to be very high. They're just going to take the very cream of the crop, people with PhDs, excellent English, under 30, that kind of thing. So that's our general system. We've also had a number of innovative programs to capture very low-skilled workers, so what we call low-skilled, so for instance, cashiers, gas station attendants, cab drivers, construction helpers, retail salespeople, all those people were captured under an innovative program called the Temporary Resident to Permanent Resident Program, where I think there were 20,000 healthcare jobs, and 30,000 of the jobs I just described, those people have been approved in just a few months for the most part. And then we have some others as well. We have a bunch of pilot programs, like the Atlantic Pilot Program, for people who are in the eastern part of Canada doing relatively low-skilled jobs. If they have an employer supporting them, they can get immigration. We have a rural and northern pilot, agri-food, so mushroom and greenhouse industry. So we have these weird kind of pilots throughout, and then we have actual provincial nominee programs to make it more complicated, where we have all the provinces across Canada have their own immigration programs. And for that, you usually need a connection to the province, like worked or studied it. So Canada has a real mess of tons of immigration programs. It's extremely confusing, we do maintain a very high level of immigration. Like I said, 401,000 is the target this year, and 411,000 is the target next year. So I'll stop there.
So,
I have a
right.
question, Ravi.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mala.
What I'm not hearing from you is any, Canada doesn't seem to be concerned about the country of origin, unlike in the US where, we have a diversity lottery to increase immigration from underrepresented countries. And we have a backlog for those that are overrepresented. So it doesn't seem to be an issue in Canada.
Nope. Our largest source countries traditionally are the Philippines, China, and India. China is a bit more challenging because of the language, but I think we consider. A lot of Filipinos may come. They have an education system very similar to ours because of the U.S. involvement in the Philippines, of course. But a lot of them, many will come into the caregiver programs, which we can also talk a little bit about because our caregiver programs involve working for a couple of years, either caring for the elderly or young children and working with families. And then after 2 years, as long as they meet some basic English requirements and have an educational requirement of just, what's equivalent to a diploma, so like technical college level or a bachelor's or whatever, as long as they have post-secondary, that's equivalent to Canada, we make them permanent residents. So they then will bring in children from abroad, they may bring a spouse, they may sponsor parents, but they are very successfully integrated as immigrants. Again, potentially the education system, the English, many of them doing essential jobs that that maybe Canadians don't want to do, like caregiving. So Philippines is huge. China, there's a large number of people coming in as international students, and many of them transfer into having Canadian work experience and immigration. But Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, maybe to a lesser extent, but Indians, because there's the language, and many of them are coming in, well, either through the family class, they're bringing in parents, they're bringing in spouses. Sometimes when they sponsor parents, again, anyone under 22 is considered a dependent. So if you sponsor your parents and you have like 3 siblings under 22, they all come. But also for sure, like the skilled workers, so we don't have that. We have a race-neutral immigration system. That's something that we adopted many decades ago. And because of that system, we don't really look at that. Now, having said that, we certainly have had major backlogs when it was processed, at particular visa offices. Before Express Entry came in, you would have backlogs of 6-7 years in Delhi, for instance, and not so much in the UK, right? Mm-hmm. So there was that, that control in terms of not having all of immigration being fulfilled by one particular country. But when we got rid of that backlog and just created Express Entry, it's really just it's race neutral, and it's about your points. And if you have the points and you have the Canadian work experience, you're in.
Wow. So we have something, in terms of, I'm very interested in that 400,000 number. Here, you have, I think it's 226,000 for family-based allotted green card numbers. And then you have 140,000 allotted employment-based green card numbers. And then with the employment-based, it's split up into employment-based categories. You have employment-based 1, employment-based 2, employment-based 3. And you have varying degrees of education required for each employment-based experience and education. And then those 140,000 are divided in 2 countries, like 26,000 per country. And then no one country can have more than 7% of the 26,000 of the 140,000. So basically it turns out that the countries that have the largest backlog, because kind of like you said, like they're waiting, that backlog, India, China, and the Philippines are the ones that have the longest backlog in different categories. So you see a lot of people actually that will have filed their green card case here in the United States. They'll accumulate all this experience, and while they're waiting, like I think for India, the number is now 70 years if they're in that employment-based 3 category because of the tremendous backlogs. They will file. Right.
January 2012.
Yeah. So and those numbers move forward 1 month every month, so it's a lifetime for many. So people actually
Yeah, so
start
the
to
answer is,
file. They file in Canada while they're waiting for the US immigration to come through. A lot of them move to Canada and start their lives there. And then at some point in time, they might move back here. But Canada is benefiting a lot from the US backlogs.
we are. No, we've exploited that for sure. As it became more nativistic and and it became more difficult, Canada literally created programs entirely with the U.S. in mind in terms of the system there. But of course, the answer is, if you think about it, I mean, you're about 10 times the size of Canada population-wise, right? So if you had 10 times 400,000, you would have 4 million, right? If you had 4 million every year, that would solve your problems in terms of like the backlogs, right? But there has to be the will. And I think part of it is, we really don't have any. I mean, this relates to policy, which of course relates to politics. I mean, we don't really have any. We're not the only sort of G7 or G8 country like in the world, like developed country, Western country, that just does not have a political party, a mainstream political party that is against immigration, right? And I think that there is you have the separation of powers you have, with Congress being gridlocked and et cetera. I mean, it's very difficult. Like, you have the same alphabet soup of categories you've always had, really, because it's very difficult. Whereas, and that's not a knock on the U.S., because I'll give a criticism of Canada. One criticism I have is that, I would like certain things traditionally have been passed through Parliament, but what we have done in Canada is we've done these budget bills that basically the government in power will shove as much as they want into these budget bills and then dare the opposition to challenge them on it. And if they do, it means that the government falls. But if the opposition doesn't feel like the government can fall, they'll let the government get away with shoving all this stuff into these budget implementation bills. Now, what do they put in there? They put in there things like the ability of the minister to give ministerial instructions. So these days, part of it's good, part of it's bad. I mean, we can really pivot because the government of the day, the minister of immigration, can just create laws without going to Parliament. So that's undemocratic. It can allow us to be responsive to situations that are occurring in the world and in the economy. But it is a very different system. So you're more democratic for sure, but your system, is not changing and evolving in a way that may benefit the United States and its citizens. But our system is maybe less democratic, but allows us to pivot on a dime and create these programs. So anyway, so that's I don't know how I digress from that.
We're almost at the last 5 minutes. And so basically, as immigration lawyers, where we're leading everyone, whether it's family or employment based, is to citizenship, whether in US or Canada. So I was going to ask, is it easier in the US or Canada to get citizenship? But I think we talked about that already. But definitely in employment based in the US, after I think it's 2 years and 9 months, you can apply if you were employment based sponsored for citizenship. And if it's family based, it's 5 years.
No, it's the reverse. It's 5 years after employment based and 2 years after for family based. Is that what you just said, or did I misinterpret what you said?
That's fine.
Okay. So I'm sorry, Molly.
Okay, well, that's interesting. We don't have that distinction. We just have 3 years out of the last 5 years to apply. But if you're physically in Canada, with some minor exceptions, but if you're physically here for 2 years, then you can count 1 year. I'm talking about pre-permanent residence. So before you were a permanent resident, if you're in Canada for 2 years on a study permit, you can count that up to a maximum of 1 year. So every 2 day counts as 1 to a maximum of a year. So basically, you can apply after 2 years if you were already in the Canada before you became a permanent resident. But otherwise, if you just came as a permanent resident, you have to wait 3 years. And then if you're between 18 and 54, you've got to write a citizenship test and show some language proof. And the government just promised in the last federal elections they're going to waive the fees on citizenship applications. And I think that's because this particular government likes new citizens because they will vote for them. So generally, so I think that's part of why they're trying to encourage that, which is also a good thing because if you're
They're
a
going to
permanent
waive,
resident,
wait, so they're going to waive, if you want to become a citizen, you don't have to pay fees at all?
have to
You can
pay.
just fill, regardless?
Right.
Wow.
yeah, they're going to waive the fees.
I
But
can't
part
see
of it
that
is
happening
because-
here.
No. Well, again, it's sort of a political thing, right? I mean, all this stuff relates to politics, as I said. But I mean, one reason we encourage people to become citizens is because there can be some dire certain situations where, if you're a permanent resident of Canada, particularly lately, because when we brought in the marijuana legislation legalizing marijuana, the government wanted to be tough in some ways to make it more palatable to those who are concerned about it. So for drunk driving convictions, they changed it to what's called serious criminality. So those can now face jail time of up to 10 years. And that, because of that, it's not the facts of the case, but it's just the maximum penalty that drives whether it's considered serious criminality or not. And that has led to some problems because if you're if you've got a conviction in New York for drunk driving and the maximum, and we know here the maximum penalty is up to 10 years, you can be deported as a permanent resident of Canada with virtually no right of appeal. And similarly, if you're sentenced to 6 months in jail, you really you don't get a right of appeal because they've taken away all your ability to make equity arguments, humanitarian arguments. So that's something to think about. It's one of the reasons why we encourage people, not because we think they're going to commit crimes, but because people don't realize that you're in shaky ground, right? You become a citizen as soon as you can, and there's no tax implications like there is for becoming an American, where you're taxed regardless of where you live. In Canada, if you don't live here, you don't pay tax, so there's no negative tax consequences.
Wow, that's interesting. Same here. If you're a green card holder and you're convicted of a crime, it's a deportable offense. There are different tiers. They do a whole thing. Is there a crime involving moral turpitude? What does the state versus the federal law show in the conviction? Depending on the state that you have a DUI, it could actually lead to a deportation. So there are varying scales depending on the crime. And then there are all these waivers, right? So it sounds like there's no right to appeal. There are certain waivers unless it's a definite, like cocaine charge or something like that. There's just it's a deportation right there. But it's interesting how there are different nuances on that depending on the conviction.
Okay.
Wow, I think we're coming up to the hour here. Are there
Are there any
questions?
questions?
Yeah.
I don't see any questions in the chat.
People are shy.
We could have done this over a day, I think.
Lots to talk about.
There's so much to talk about. Yeah, I mean, there's some topics we didn't really even get to, but I mean, asylum, I'll just say quickly that we have a couple programs that are interesting ones. If you've worked for, the Canadian government as a translator, whether in or out of Afghanistan, we've got some programming for you. And we've also got one targeting women leaders, human rights advocates, LGBTI individuals, persecuted religious or ethnic minorities, so journalists. So we've got a good program for that. And I know you guys, I don't know what your refugee numbers are. They were pretty low in terms of Syrians, I know. But is there a target for like Afghanis? I don't know.
There's a bill floating around for an act just for Afghani refugees. But I think before I move that, I think somebody had a question. Tamara,
Yeah, sure.
Tamara? Did you want to ask your question?
U.S. travel.
Tamara?
If you can't ask it, you can go ahead and put it in the chat.
Well, someone else asked about U.S. travel. from India on November 8th.
Oh, yeah, they just announced that this morning. We don't have the details, but you need to be vaccinated. And I think the CDC is you have to go by the CDC list about which vaccines will be accepted part of that travel. We don't have the exact details yet, other than the White House through Twitter put that out there. So I'm hoping by the end of the day, we have some real facts and not relying on Twitter for changes in presidential proclamations.
And Canadians can go by land, by the way, on the same date. So that's a huge thing for Canadians, and we're the largest undefended border in the world. So, millions of people go back and forth. So Canadians have only been able to fly for tourism reasons. So we'll be able to drive in as of November 8th, which is huge. But what we don't know is because many Canadians, just like our Prime Minister, has a mixed vaccine. So we have to get confirmation from the US on whether or not I actually have 2 Pfizer doses, but many Canadians have mixed doses. So we need to get confirmation on that. But unfortunately, you will have to get a PCR test to come back into Canada. So those who want to go shopping for the day, and then return, that's actually possible if you get your PCR test in Canada. It's valid for 72 hours. So you don't have to get one in the States, but you will have to get a PCR test, which for some people it's like $100 or $150. Like it may not be worth it. But I'll just throw that out there.
I mean, for his specific question on which vaccines are on the approved list, I think the CDC is going to be issuing guidance to what the president has said the CDC will allow. And the CDC has said the ones that we allow and the ones that the World Health Organization has allowed. So you can actually go on the WHO, and there's a Excel spreadsheet where they list all of the vaccines and which ones they approve and which ones haven't. So until we get that guidance, that's where I've been referring my clients to look up the vaccines that they've received overseas to see if they are recognized by the WHO. Then most likely they will be an acceptable vaccine.
We got one question from Tamara that she put in the chat. Ravi, you mentioned an immigrant target when you were talking about the different immigrant permit programs. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so it's called a levels plan, and this government has introduced a levels plan that is actually over 3 years. So 401, 411, 421. So they set the target over the next 3 years. And the criticism from the opposition was that don't do that, just let it be tied to the economic needs of the country. Now, of course, we now have a pandemic, and the government of the day, the Liberals, were stuck with this 401 target, and they couldn't bring people from India and Philippines and China, right? Because they couldn't get here. That's why they did this thing of basically dropping the points so dramatically low and saying, well, now we know that grocers are essential. Now we know that retail, all these people are so essential, so let's make them all immigrants. Well, I can't bring in my Harvard-educated, person, but I can bring in, someone here who's not necessarily the highest skill. So it's great for people who are here, but the level plan basically breaks it down, like how many of, the family class, how many business people, how many caregivers, how many provincial army programs, blah, 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 refugees. So that's what the levels plan is.
There's another question. Any updates on Plan C for U.S. immigration reform? Mala or Hummel?
I don't know.
Hummel.
I actually don't even know what Plan C is. So if Akif, if you want to shed light on what that is, maybe we can. I haven't heard of Plan C. Mala, have you heard of Plan C?
Mm-mm.
There's another question for Ravi, it looks like. Maybe we'll come back.
Yeah,
Akif, if you can clarify. You
I-
mentioned.
Yeah, so it is
Go ahead.
confusing. Quebec has control over its own selection system. It's unique, the province of Quebec. The other provinces have programs that they run where they're given a certain allotment and they can create their own rules. But at the end of the day, immigration is federal, right? So at the end of the day, the security clearances, the criminal clearances, the medicals are all done at the federal level, and the final say is at the federal level. So if the federal officer finds some kind of inconsistency, they may go back to the province and say, hey, can you rescind this nomination? But they are given some powers to create their own programs and criteria around that. So it's a bit of a hybrid, and that's as per the Constitution as well.
Well, thanks all three of you for this wonderful discussion. I think we've gone a little bit over, but that's okay. I guess from the perspective of Saba North America, we hope we can have another one of these to follow up. It looks like we're going to need a number to get through all the issues, the immigration issues that are involved. And hopefully next time the poll will work and then we can do it a little more effectively. But I think this was a good, robust discussion and look forward to the immigration section putting on more of these to kind of get us all attuned to what's going on either side of this border, wherever you're from. Any closing remarks, Mala, Hemal, or Ravi?
I think that there's something really great to take from the Canadian system and vice versa. And, you know, the history of the countries and how the Immigration Act came about is very interesting. And America is actually looking at Canada's point system to kind of do away with the backlog. So it'll be interesting to see where that lands, and especially for essential workers like, you know, grocers and workers and stuff like that. We don't have anything for that population.
Mm.
So it's interesting.
And Canada can learn from the United States too. I mean, I think that there's, you know, there's something to be said for being able to sponsor expanded numbers of relatives, especially, you know, given the importance in certain families and the closeness they feel. I mean, we know in our community that an uncle is like a second father, you know what I mean, in some cases, right? So, and some people get left out because they sponsor parents and they're allowed to bring in everyone under 22. Well, how would you feel if you're the 24-year-old in that scenario? You're
Right.
stuck. So I think we can learn from the U.S. system as well, and it's been a real pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So pleasure, having this panel discussion with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Mala, do you have last word?
I just learned a lot about the Canadian system, so I'm really grateful for being part of this panel today and being part of SABA. It's been a great opportunity.
All right, thank you, everyone, and
Thank you,
appreciate your
everyone.
time and efforts. We have recorded this program. We're going to have to splice it a bit to ensure that there's no like weird statements. But if, you know, thank you to our three panelists and our immigration section co-chairs, more importantly than just panelists. And we look forward to a year of robust programming. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.